A respected doctor in New York is fired after helping a poor and unknown woman giving birth at dawn. The accusation? He disrespected protocols by taking care of someone outside the standards of high society. However, the next day, he receives a call that will change his life forever. Dr. Ethan Reynolds, a respected doctor in a New York hospital, has always been proud of his career. Dedicated, serious, and with a huge passion for medicine, her life was centered on saving lives, regardless of who the patient was. For him, each life had an incalculable value, and he believed that the profession that had chosen allowed him to make a difference in the world. The morning of that day started like any other. Ethan woke up early, prepared for office hours, and took coffee as he quickly read his patient's emails. The hospital was busy, but there was nothing out of the ordinary, until a woman appeared in the emergency room. His name was Maria Lopez, a young woman looking just over 30 years in simple and sloppy clothes. She looked nervous and, most importantly, was in intense pain. Looking at her, Ethan immediately realized that she was in labor. Maria, without much resources, had arrived without a companion, without proper assistance, and seemed fearful. His appearance did not match the standards of the patients with whom Ethan was used to dealing, but that made no difference. He was a doctor, and his responsibility was to take care of her. Without hesitation, he took her to the delivery room. During labor, Ethan noticed that she was more fragile than normal, not only physically but emotionally as well. However, with your experience and dedication, childbirth went well. A healthy baby was born, and Maria, exhausted but smiling, looked at her child with eyes full of gratitude. Despite the precarious financial condition, it seemed radiant of happiness. However, at the end of the day, Ethan was called to the office of the director of the hospital, Dr. Gregory Finch. Upon entering, Ethan felt a tension in the air. Dr. Finch was not smiling as usual. "Ethan," he said with a serious tone, "I just received a very serious complaint about you." Ethan's heart shot. He had no idea what could have happened. He had always followed the rules and guaranteed that his patients were well cared for. "You gave birth to a woman who had no adequate financial conditions and was poorly dressed. This was a direct violation of our hospital protocols. Patients like her are not our priority." Dr. Finch's words were harsh. Ethan was perplexed. "But she was at work. She couldn't just leave her, Dr. Finch." "This is irrelevant," answered Dr. Finch with a look that conveyed coldness. "You put the hospital reputation at risk. I can't allow it to continue. You're fired." The shock took over Ethan. How could this be happening? He would never imagine that such a human and natural action as helping a woman giving birth would be reason for her resignation. After resignation, Ethan was lost, not only for the loss of employment, but for the injustice he felt about the treatment he and Mary had received. He always believed that medicine was a profession where everyone should be treated equally, but now he wondered what really mattered in the health system where he worked. Injustice seemed to be the true rule, and he, a man of principles, has now seen himself aimlessly. In the following days, Ethan began to investigate what had really happened. He talked to co-workers and listened to stories that shocked him even more. He found that his resignation was not a simple issue of hospital policy. She was linked to something much bigger, something he would never imagine. The woman he had helped, Maria Lopez, was not a stranger. She was, in fact, an heiress of one of the most powerful families in the country, owner of several multi-millioning corporations. The fact that he was in a public hospital, with simple clothes and without a companion, was not out of necessity, but by choice. Mary had decided to escape her luxurious life, move away from the pressure and ostentation of her family after a personal tragedy that had marked her deeply. But how did this connect to your resignation? Ethan didn't know, but something in his instinct made him look more. He found that the hospital he worked on was actually pressured by large investors who were linked to his father's empire, Victor Lopez. The power of his family had a lot to do with the decisions being made in the shadows, and Ethan unknowingly became a pawn in this dirty game. While investigating, Ethan felt even further away from the world he knew. His career and reputation, which he had built with such effort, were now being destroyed by something he did not fully understand. He wanted justice, not only for himself, but also to Maria. She was being used as a piece in a larger board, and he wanted to find out why. It was at this moment of uncertainty and anguish that Ethan received a call. The sound of the phone ringing that silent afternoon seemed to break the tension surrounding him. "Dr. Reynolds?" The voice to the other side was firm, but calm, with a touch of softness. "Yes," answered Ethan, his heart beating faster. "I'm Maria Lopez. I know you have a lot of questions, and I want to help you understand everything." Her voice, though soft, conveyed a seriousness that left Ethan speechless. He hesitated, but something inside him boosted him to hear what she had to say. I don't understand. What happened? I just did my job." "I know, Dr. Reynolds, and that's why I'm calling." Maria's voice became lower, almost like a whisper. "I need you to come to me. There are things you need to know, and maybe, just maybe, I can help you recover what you have lost." Ethan was silent for a few seconds, processing Mary's words. What did she mean by help, and why did he need to go to her? The doubt consumed him, but also a part of him knew that call could be his only chance to understand what was really going on. Without thinking too much, he wrote down the address Maria gave her, and the next day went to the indicated place. The house was not what he expected. It was not a luxurious mansion, as he had imagined for the heiress of a great fortune. It was a simple house away from the city center, almost hidden among trees. The modest facade contrasted with his image of the Lopez family, and that made him even more intrigued. When Mary received him at the door, he felt a tension in the air. She was different from the last time she saw her. Although she was still in her clothes, her eyes reflected a deep pain, as if she were carrying a huge burden. "Dr. Reynolds, thanks for coming," she said, giving a shy smile. "I know it must be confused, but I needed you to know the truth." They sat in a simple room where Mary began to talk about her life, about the reasons that led her to take the path of loneliness and humility. She explained that after her brother's death in a car accident, she fled from her family, unable to endure the weight of guilt and pressure. The tragedy had been the drop of water, and she felt that by moving away from luxury and family obligations, she found a little peace. "I'm more than a rich heiress," she said with teary eyes. "My life, my happiness do not depend on money or status. But at the same time, I cannot ignore the power my family exerts on the world. And my father, he doesn't want you to know the truth about what happened in the hospital." Ethan was astonished. He had never imagined that the woman he had helped were so deeply marked by personal pain. But at the same time, her words began to make sense. What he had lived so far looked like a plot he couldn't understand completely, but was far beyond a simple social class issue. Maria then revealed to her what he didn't know. The hospital where he worked was being pressured by the Lopez family investors. His father, Victor Lopez, was trying to expand his business interests, and a public hospital was the ideal place to do it. He didn't care about people's lives, much less the integrity of doctors. The focus was on profit, the brand they could build with the influence they had. "This is what caused his resignation, Dr. Reynolds," Mary continued, the embargoed voice. "My father wanted the hospital to follow certain interests, and you became an obstacle. They didn't want you to take care of a woman like me without power, without influence. You represented what they feared most, a doctor who cared about people, regardless of their origin." Ethan felt a wave of anger take over him. He was being used, manipulated, and did not even know. But when he looked at Mary, he saw something more. A woman who, despite everything, was trying to fight for the truth. She didn't want revenge, but justice. "You didn't know what was happening behind the curtains," Mary said as reading Ethan's thoughts. "And that's why I'm here. I can help you change all this. I can use the power of my family to correct what was done. But it's not just for you. It's right." Ethan was silent. The dilemma was before him. He could accept Maria's help, use her influence to recover her career, or could choose to fight alone and perhaps lose everything again. He knew that beside her, he would have a chance to change the system. But he also knew it meant to get into a much larger power game. "I am willing to help you," Mary said, breaking the silence. "But you need to understand one thing. This will not be easy. My father and the other powerful won't let you win without a fight. But if you want, we can start now." Ethan, though still skeptical, knew he had no choice anymore. What he wanted was not only justice to him, but for all those who, like Mary, were being neglected by the system. He took a deep breath and looked at her with a renewed determination. "I accept. Let's fight." In the following days, Ethan and Maria joined a small group of allies who were willing to face the corrupt system that dominated the hospital. Maria, despite her isolated life, knew how to move the pieces in the corporate world, and she used her influence to gather documents, financial reports, and testimonies that could expose the abuses committed by the hospital administration and her father's scun interests. Ethan, in turn, began to feel the weight of the situation. Every decision they made had repercussions that he could not anticipate, and the truth was beginning to reveal himself in a way he had never imagined. But not everything happened quietly. The pressure was increasing. Hospital administration members began to act more hostility, and Ethan felt that the threats were becoming more frequent. Not only him, but also the other doctors who were positioning themselves against high-summit decisions were being targeted by criticism and pressure. It was then that on a tense night, Ethan received an anonymous message on his cell phone. The message said only, "Watch out. They know what you're trying to do." Although it didn't answer, the message made him restless. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, but he also felt that if he did nothing, he would be allowing injustice to perpetuate himself. Maria was by her side, but she also knew what was at stake. She warned him that deep down his father would not hesitate to use all his resources to heal them. "I know you want to believe everything will work out, Ethan. But remember, my father has more power than you think. We can't underestimate his strength," Maria said, while the two, sitting in a silent coffee, discussed their next steps. She was right. The danger was real, and the threat was not just the hospital, but from the network of influences her family had built over decades. However, there was something more than Maria had not told Ethan until then. She, as part of her family's removal process, was in a legal battle with her father, contesting the administration of her assets and business actions. The impact of this legal struggle was deep and at the same time dangerous to her. What she revealed to Ethan was that her own father, to silence any threat to her empire, had methods of intimidation that went far beyond simple legal or corporate threats. "I'm ready to face my father, but that will cost much more than a simple victory in court," she said, her eyes full of determination. "I know what he can do, and I'm willing to go to the end. But you have to be prepared, Ethan." Meanwhile, Ethan began to reflect on the impact of his actions not only for him, but for other doctors who, like him, wanted to fight injustice, but were afraid of repercussions. What started as a simple act of rebellion against a corrupted system was becoming a true revolution in the hospital. Some colleagues began to move away, while others were willing to help, but with reservations. The tension spread like an uncontrollable fire. In a secret meeting between doctors and allies, the situation became even clearer. The change would not be easy. The hospital was deeply rooted in the system of interests of large corporations and investors, and confronting them meant fighting something much larger than a simple hospital. Maria, with her knowledge of how her father's empire worked, began to elaborate a bolder attack strategy. But there was a problem. The key to exposing the corrupt system was in a highly confidential document, something no one knew existed, but Maria believed she could turn the tide to her advantage. "This document contains the evidence that my father and other investors are manipulating the hospital for their own interests. If we can put it in the right hands, the battle will be won. But to find it, we need to invade the security of the company where he keeps this information," Maria said, with a shine in the eyes. Ethan knew this was a gigantic and dangerous step. Invading the Lopez family security was something that could cost not only their careers, but also their lives. The tension was in the air. At every moment, more pieces of the puzzle began to fit in, but they also became riskier. "Are we ready for this?" Ethan asked, feeling the weight of each word. "Do we know what we are getting into?" Mary looked at him, and for the first time he realized the loneliness she carried. She was not just in a struggle for the truth, but in a personal battle against her own past. She knew that by taking this step, she was putting everything she had achieved hitherto at risk. "I'm ready. And you, Ethan?" Maria responded, with a look that conveyed so much confidence and the fear of the unknown. The decision was made. They would advance. Ethan and Maria were ready. They had decided that they would go behind the secret document, the one who could overthrow the empire built by her father and expose the corruption that was corroding the hospital. But as the plan unfolded, the tension increased. Every step they took was as if they were walking in a minefield, aware that an error could mean the end of everything. The first step was to infiltrate the security system of the company where Victor Lopez kept confidential documents. Maria, with her knowledge of family operations, knew exactly where the files were stored. The plan seemed simple, but there was nothing simple to invade one of the city's most protected buildings. "I will need you to break into the system and access the security cameras," Maria said calmly while preparing a device to hack security systems. "I'll be with you all the time, but you need to be careful. What we're going to do is not something you can just erase from memory." Ethan was nervous. He had never imagined that he would be involved in something so dark. He had been a doctor, juror to save lives, but now he saw himself in a fight against a powerful machine, a network of interests that was willing to destroy everything he believed. However, he knew there was no return. He needed to do this for him, Maria, and all the people who had been victims of an unfair system. The night they put the plan into action, the streets of New York seemed darker than ever. They met with a small group of hackers that Maria knew, people who had helped the Lopez family on several occasions, but are now willing to use their skills to overthrow it. The mood was tense, and the clock seemed to run against them. When they arrived at the building where the files were stored, everything seemed calm and silent. Safety was intense, but Maria's plan was well structured, and each movement was done accurately. Ethan felt like an intruder in a world to which he did not belong. He was there to break rules, to expose secrets, and the idea that this could really happen left him in a state of constant restlessness. Maria, with the help of one of the hackers, accessed the systems and managed to locate them. The document was there, protected by safety layers, but there was a problem. To access the file, it was necessary to overcome a final blockade, something not even Maria had predicted. A password, which seemed to be an insurmountable barrier. "This was not on the plan," Maria said with a tense voice. "They changed security. We can't get out of here without that file." Ethan knew that if they couldn't find a solution quickly, they would be caught. The adrenaline began to rise. The idea that everything could be lost was becoming increasingly real. The silence in the building was overwhelming, and the sound of the keys being pressed echoed on the walls. That's when the hacker, nervous, finally managed to break the blockade. They were inside. The file was there and the tests were about to be revealed. But at that moment, when Mary began to download the document, the building's lights went out. An alarm sounded. The building's safety system had been activated. "Come on!" shouted Maria, pulling Ethan by the hand. They ran down the dark corridor, hearing the steps of the guards approaching. The escape plan they had prepared was now being tested. They reached the way out of the building, but when they were almost on the street, Ethan heard the sound of a familiar voice. He turned, and his heart shot. "Dr. Reynolds, do you really think you can escape it?" The voice was by Dr. Gregory Finch, the director of the hospital, who was now stopped at the door, watching them with a cold smile. "Were you so sure that you could destroy everything we built?" Ethan was paralyzed for a moment, and Maria pulled him quickly. What he didn't know was that Finch was involved in the game much more than he imagined. The director, in addition to working for the Lopez family, was now revealing his true face. He was a key piece in the hospital's handling plan, and everything that had happened to Ethan had been orchestrated. "You knew, don't you?" Maria said, staring at Finch. "I knew it was manipulating us all the time." The director laughed softly. "I'm just a pawn in this game, Maria. True power has always been in her hands, but you couldn't see it so far." Ethan was shocked. Everything he thought was a fair struggle now seemed an even bigger web of lies. What did he do there? Was it really fighting for justice, or something he couldn't understand completely? The revelation about Finch was just the beginning of a series of even more complex and treacherous moves. Maria looked at Ethan with a determined look. "Let's end this now. Together." Ethan took a deep breath, knowing that that moment would change everything. The game was about to turn into a final battle. The race against time had begun. The alarm sounded, and the steps of the guards echoed closer and closer. Ethan and Maria were trapped but not willing to give up. What had just happened in the corridor with Dr. Finch's revelation made Ethan feel the weight of his fight more than ever. He was in the middle of something much bigger, much more dangerous than he imagined. Mary pulled him by the hand hard, and the two ran toward an emergency exit. On the way, Maria gave a look back, watching the director still standing, watching them with a cold smile, as if she already knew that the situation was about to unfold the way he had planned all the time. "He knew all the time, Maria." "How?" Ethan asked, still trying to soothe what he had just heard. "Finch, was he involved in all this?" Maria, without losing her calm, answered quickly. "He was, Ethan. Finch always knew of our fight. He was one of the key pieces of handling the whole system. The question is no longer just facing him, but understanding how he connects with my father. They are both part of the same dirty game." The tension raised with every step they took, but the adrenaline seemed to keep them moving. They reached an isolated area of the back of the building, where one of Mary's allies was waiting for them with a car. Upon entering the vehicle and starting to move away from the building, the silence was broken by the question that had been hammering on Ethan's head. "And now, Maria? What are we going to do with what we find? How are we going to make sure the world knows what happened here?" He questioned the thoughts 1,000. Mary looked at him, still with the expression decided, but with visible tiredness. "Now, Ethan, the real battle begins. My father won't stop. He used Finch to destabilize us, but it won't be enough. I'm going to take control of this situation." Maria, in her firm tone, knew the game was far from over. The document they had been able to access was more than a simple set of evidence. He was the key to dismantling the empire of which her father was part, an empire that until that moment seemed unshakable. But now, Maria was ready to do anything necessary to expose the truth. The time that followed was a mixture of voltage and calculated strategies. Maria used her connections to gather the documents and create a public exhibition that would undermine the hospital's structures and, in a break, would highlight her father's role in the manipulations that had been made over the years. But she knew it meant putting everyone involved at risk. What was ahead would be a clash not only with his father, but with the whole network of allies he had grown throughout his life. "Okay, Maria, but how are we going to do this without being swallowed by his power?" Ethan asked, still with a doubt at the bottom of his soul. He knew that Mary had the strength to fight, but the fear of losing everything, even her own security, weighed in her mind. "Let's act with caution, Ethan," Mary said. "The first step is to ensure that the document reaches the right hands. Only then will we expose what they have done and end what is happening. We need the press, the authorities. I have some powerful allies, but if we do it the wrong way, our game will end even before starting." The plan was meticulously elaborated. Maria and Ethan worked tirelessly to ensure the document was delivered safely. But as they approached the final phase, a new threat arose. Victor Lopez's power was not restricted to the hospital walls. He had resources and contacts that went far beyond what anyone would imagine. Maria knew that, but now the concern was greater. What would happen to those who were helping? What about doctors and the others involved? "We can't let them become targets," Ethan said, concerned about the impact of their actions on the surrounding people. Maria sighed, aware of the complexity of the situation. "We are all at risk, Ethan. This is no longer about both of us. It is about exposing what is wrong. And if that means we will have to fight to the end, then that's what we will do." The conflict was at its peak, and each movement seemed too risky. But while the board pieces moved, Maria knew that the key to winning the battle would be the union of unexpected forces. It was time to transform pain and struggle into something that would bring justice, not just for it, but for all who had been crushed by manipulation and greed. The weight of the journey began to affect Ethan and Maria in different ways. Both were changed, but not only physically but emotionally, with the constant challenges they faced. Mary, though strong and determined, was beginning to realize that the struggle for justice was not only about overthrowing her father's empire, but also about personal growth itself. Looking at Ethan, she saw someone who, unknowingly, had gone from a simple doctor to a combatant in a battle for dignity, for something greater than her own interests. "I never imagined I would be able to do it all," Maria commented as they walked through the silent streets of New York at night, discussing the next steps. "But now, I feel I can no longer stop. This is not just about my family, or about me. It's about every person who was wronged." I saw it in the eyes of those who were ignored by the system. Ethan looked at her, surprised by the intensity of her words. He had begun to fight for her for a personal reason, but now he understood that the battle was beyond any personal revenge. He felt that he had grown somehow, maturing with every difficult decision they made together. He was becoming a braver, more aware of his role in the world, and that made him stronger every day. "I understand, Maria," said Ethan, taking a deep breath. "I found myself in this fight unintentionally, and now it's more than wanting to do justice for me. I see everything differently. Every life, every person, every gesture of kindness. All this has more value than I imagined." Maria smiled softly at him, grateful for her words. She felt that somehow her own transformation was linked to him. The doctor she knew, the man who helped bring to light the life of a baby, was now involved in a battle where the concept of life and death seemed to be at stake at a much deeper level. The following weeks were a mix of frantic activities and moments of reflection. Mary, with the help of her allies, finally managed to gather the evidence she needed to expose her father's empire. But as the time of acting approached, the risks increased exponentially. The power network that Victor Lopez had created was not willing to be easily overthrown. The system was armored, and as more documents were disclosed, more obstacles emerged. "They are watching us," Maria said on a particularly tense night, after a meeting with journalists who would help spread the evidence. "I can't trust anyone anymore. I didn't expect it to be so hard, but it is getting out of control." Ethan knew that Mary's words were true. They had become involved with powerful and dangerous people, and even with the tests in hand, there was still much to be done. The fight was in its last stages, but the risk of failing was palpable. "We'll make it," said Ethan with a confidence he didn't know he had. "No matter what happens, I believe in us." Mary looked at him for a moment, his calm words, but full of emotion. "I believe too, Ethan. But you know deep down that the consequences of this will move us forever." The last step was the most risky. Maria and Ethan had to infiltrate the center of operations of their father's empire and deliver the documents directly into the hands of the press. It was a bold but necessary move. They knew that if they failed, they could lose everything, including their own lives. On the eve of the big day, while preparing, Ethan and Maria had a sincere and intimate conversation, away from the shadows of the fight. They were finally allowing themselves to reflect on everything they had lived. "I know you're afraid, Maria," said Ethan, with a rare softness in his voice. "I have it too, but we can't go back now. This is bigger than both of us." Mary looked at him, her eyes reflecting not only concern but a renewed force. "I don't know what the future reserves us, Ethan, but I know I can no longer be a spectator in my own life. I need to do the right thing, and I know you'll be by my side, no matter what happens." They knew this was the last chance to change everything. What happened after this step would depend on the courageous act of action they were about to take. Both had grown and transformed throughout this journey, each discovering forces they did not know they had. Deep down, they knew that regardless of what the future brought, this fight would make them different people, stronger, more determined people. The tension climate was in the air. Maria and Ethan had reached the culmination of their fight, and the weight of what they were about to do was palpable. The final operation to overthrow Victor Lopez's empire was about to happen, and all his movements needed to be meticulously planned. The danger was around every corner, and the pressure only increased as the day approached. However, despite all the apprehension, there was a sense of determination in the air. Both had become this journey, but what awaited them would require not only courage, but also an unshakable mutual confidence. If they failed now, they would lose everything: their careers, their lives, and most importantly, the chance to give a different future to all those who, like Mary, were crushed by the corruption of the system. They met with the last allies, a select group of people who were willing to help even knowing the risks. Each would play a crucial role in the operation that Maria and Ethan had carefully planned. The goal was simple but risky: to infiltrate the Victor Lopez Operations Center, to ensure that the tests would reach the press, and to expose them to the public so that no one else was the victim of the abuse of power. "We have to be fast and quiet," Maria instructed. "Let's act before they can realize what we are doing. If we can escape the building without being detected, the truth will be revealed." Ethan was focused, aware of how at stake was. "I trust you, Maria. Let's do our best." Maria, seeing Ethan's determined look, took a deep breath. She knew this operation was not just a confrontation with her father. It was a confrontation with the system it represented, a power and corruption system that infiltrated the structures of many institutions. But the most important thing for Mary was that by doing so, she was taking control of her life, once and for all. "I know we're at risk, Ethan," she said, her calm voice, but loaded with a contained emotion. "But this is no longer about beating my father. This is about fighting for what is right, and that is worth any sacrifice." The plan was in action. Maria and Ethan, accompanied by a small group of allies, went to the building where everything would happen. The day was cloudy and the city of New York seemed more dark than normal. The streets were empty, and the atmosphere was heavy. The feeling that something big was about to happen hung in the air. Upon arriving at the building, they positioned themselves strategically, each taking their place to ensure that the operation ran without failure. Maria and Ethan knew that if something was wrong, the consequences would be devastating. But there was no return. Time was against them, and the tension only increased as they approached the room where the tests were stored. "The last step is the hardest," Maria said, looking at Ethan. "When we take the documents and pass them to the press, they will try to stop us. We have to be ready for anything." Ethan nodded, his face seriously. "No matter what happens, Maria, we're in this together." As they prepared for action, the feeling that what they were about to do would change their lives forever involved them. Ethan knew that by exposing the truth, he was challenging not only the Lopez family, but also an entire system he had known and respected as a doctor. This meant confronting the shadows of power that extended throughout the health system and beyond. But for Maria, the biggest challenge was not the physical risk. It was the emotional confrontation with her own father, someone she had tried to avoid for so long, but now was about to be exposed to the world. She knew this exhibition would come with great consequences, but she also knew that when facing the truth, she would be freeing herself once and for all from the emotional prison she carried. The operation was started. The moment of acting had arrived. Maria, Ethan, and the allies moved accurately, as if they were part of a larger plan that had been thought of for days. They had everything they needed to make a difference, and now the only remaining obstacle was time. They needed to leave that building without being detected, with the tests in hand, before Victor Lopez or his allies knew what was going on. The room was ahead. The only thing left was to ensure that they could fulfill their mission without fail. The moment had arrived. Maria, Ethan, and her allies were at the door of the room where the document was kept. The plan was simple, but any mistake could ruin everything. The silence was absolute, and the weight of responsibility seemed to carry the air. Maria looked at Ethan, and for the first time in a long time, he saw the fear in her eyes. It was not the fear of immediate danger, but the fear of finally face the truth she had avoided for so long. "Are we ready?" Maria asked, her low, tense voice. Ethan nodded, trying to hide the anxiety he also felt. "We are. Let's do that." The room door was just a few steps away, and the sound of its steps seemed to echo throughout the corridor. They knew that any movement could warn security, and the risk of failing was increasingly evident. They had rehearsed everything in the smallest detail, but as they approached the critical point, a sense of uncertainty took over Ethan. "Missing," Maria murmured, as trying to be convinced that everything would work out. When they arrived at the door, Maria looked at the other allies who were positioned at strategic points ready to act if necessary. With a quick gesture, she opened the door. The room was silent, full of files and papers. In the corner, on a table, was the document she sought so much. The key to overthrowing his father and ending the corruption. He had dominated his lives. Maria approached the table with quick but careful steps, while Ethan kept the door open. He felt the tension in the air, as if the smallest error could be fatal. When Maria took the document, something unexpected happened. The sound of quick steps approaching the hall made your heart trigger. They were being followed. "Come on!" Maria shouted, taking the document and placing it in her backpack. Before they could leave the room, the door opened with violence. Dr. Gregory Finch appeared, his face revealing a sarcastic smile. He had followed them. He knew what they were doing all the time. "Do you really think they could escape with it?" Finch said with a tone of contempt. "I always knew that you would do this, Maria. But you underestimated the power we have. Now it's too late." The tension climate exploded. Maria and Ethan exchanged a quick look. What they were doing now was much more than a simple escape. It was a struggle for the truth. The adrenaline took over Ethan, and he knew it was not coming back. Finch advanced toward Maria. "You've always been a rebellious child, don't you? Your father knew that, but he preferred to let you play out. Now you'll learn that you can't play with the powerful." "We don't have time for that, Finch," Maria shouted, pushing him back, but he blocked the way. At this moment, a side door opened, and one of Maria's allies appeared, shouting, "They are coming, security!" It was now or never. The situation was about to become a physical confrontation. Mary, without hesitation, turned to Ethan and said firmly, "Go! Get out of here with the document. I will follow him. We can't let it fall into his hands." Ethan hesitated for a moment, looking at Maria, but knew she was right. They had been too risky to fail now. With his heart beating hard, he ran toward the exit, the sound of his steps echoing in the corridors. Time seemed to slow down as he ran, feeling the weight of the document that could change everything. Upon reaching the building's departure, he turned, but Maria was no longer behind him. The security sound approaching made him understand that she was sacrificing herself to ensure her escape. Maria was facing the guards, struggling to gain time. The last thing Ethan saw was his determined face before he went out the door and racing to the street. The document was in his hands, but the pain of leaving Maria behind weighed on her chest. He looked at the building one last time. What would happen next? I didn't know, but I felt that if they could expose the truth, it would all be worth it. He headed toward the meeting point where the press was waiting for him, the feeling that something was finally about to change. Ethan reached the meeting point panting and with a rapid heart. The document was safe, but he knew the battle was not yet overcome. He handed the material to a reliable journalist, someone who had promised to disseminate the story impartially and with integrity. The tension was immense, and the feeling that all the weight of it was in his hands made him doubt if he was really ready to face the repercussions. The journalist looked at him and, with a slight nod, made the promise that the story would be revealed. But Ethan couldn't stay there to watch. He needed to go back to Maria. He knew she had been behind to secure her escape, but he feared it had been captured. Anguish consumed him as he ran back in search of the woman who had become not only an ally, but someone he had begun to trust deeply. While running through the empty streets of New York, police sirens began to sound in the background. Maria's operation, although risky, had generated a wave of immediate reactions. The press was now covering the story, and the truth about what had happened in the hospital was beginning to spread. But Ethan could not relax. He needed to know if Maria was safe. He arrived at the building shortly thereafter, his heart beating hard. He saw the police surrounding the scene, but no one seemed to be in a position to prevent his entry. With a renewed determination, Ethan entered the building and started looking for Maria. It was then that he saw her, still standing. With the same expression of strength he knew, she was surrounded by security guards but was not captured. She had faced the system and was now witnessing the fall of the walls that had imprisoned it for so long. Mary looked at Ethan, and the expression in her eyes was no longer concerned but of relief. She had fulfilled her part. She knew that her father's empire would begin to crumble and that the truth would finally be heard. "You got Ethan," Maria said with a smile. "We got it." Ethan ran to her relieved. "Are you well?" Maria nodded, although her eyes still reflected an immense exhaustion. Now, what started as a revenge ended up being a struggle for justice. And more importantly, we ended up with the silence that imprisoned me for so long. Ethan felt a growing peace. Despite all the pain and the sacrifices made, the truth would finally be exposed. The empire of his father, who seemed untouchable, was now crumbling. Mary's actions and their courage had generated a real change. While the story won the newspapers and Victor Lopez's empire began to crumble, Maria and Ethan moved away from the tumultuous scene. They knew that the way ahead would be long, but now, together, they had the strength necessary to face anything the future reserved for them. The struggle for truth and justice is never easy, but it is through it that we can transform the world around us. What would you do in place of Ethan or Mary? Would you have the courage to face a powerful system, knowing the consequences? Share your reflections and say us. How would you make the difference in your own life or in the lives of others? Together we can continue to fight for a fairer world. Comment below and share this story with those who also believe in the power of truth.